Greetings, everyone. This is Jay Artis-Wright. This is the Choice Words podcast, our second season. And I am so excited to just kick off another season of opportunities to engage with our listeners and our viewers so they can learn more about homeschooling, charter schooling, non traditional schooling, traditional schooling, all of the educational options that are available to our communities. Choice Words podcast was brought to everyone as an opportunity to learn, to engage, and feel empowered about your learning. And so, listeners and viewers, we will continue this podcast throughout the year for opportunities for you to just not only hear from people that we've talked to in the past, but also in this case, some of their children. So I'm excited today because on our last series, we had an interview with a physician by the name of Dr. Maisha Taylor, also known as Doc McStuffin. And during that conversation, we heard from Dr. Maisha Taylor about her experience raising young adults and empowering her children through homeschooling. And it was such a inspiring and interesting conversation that we wanted to get the perspective from the student themselves. And so today, I'm excited to be joined by Ms. Haley Taylor Schlitz, who is the daughter of Dr. Maisha Taylor. So, hey, Haley, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited as well. And so when we were talking with Dr. Maisha Taylor, she was explaining to us the experience of shifting you all from a traditional public school system into a homeschool environment. Um, and for the viewers who didn't tune into that episode, please go back and listen and view it. But the other thing that's interesting about Ms. Haley Taylor Schlitz that we're going to get into is that Haley actually graduated very early and then pursued more of her education. So we're going to talk about that. But she also wrote and co-authored this book with her mother called The Homeschool Alternative. And we'll make sure that our listeners get access to information on how to get that book. But Haley, just to start us off, just tell us a little bit about yourself, that experience as a homeschool kid, the transition, and what basically motivated you and your mom to write that book.
Yeah, no, again, thank you for having me. I actually I'm the oldest child, so I was the first one to be homeschooled. My brother was pulled out pretty much at the same time, but I was really the spark given my experience in public school, which I'm sure we'll get into. But that's pretty much how this whole journey started. And when I was started homeschooling, I was 10, 11 years old in fifth grade. But then I graduated high school at 13. Being in that program allowed me to get the customized education that I truly needed. So courses that usually take a year, such as geometry or algebra, didn't take me a whole year. I was able to do it in 3 months or 2 months. And that was able to, bits and pieces of time were saved because of that. So that's how I ended up graduating high school at 13. And being 13 years old and the oldest child, there was no, blueprint for this situation. So my parents decided we'll send her to community college. That could be a good first exposure to university and college level work without throwing her in the deep end. And so that's what we did. I went to Tarrant County Community College for 1 year, and I did my freshman and sophomore year within that 1 year at the community college. So again, that did change my 4 year program to end up being a 3 year program from my bachelor's degree. And yeah, I was a major in chemistry. I wanted to be a doctor like my mom, but when I transferred to Texas Women's University, I ended up switching my major to education. After I graduated at 16, I went to law school, and then I graduated at 19, and now I'm a practicing attorney in Minnesota.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That is I can't even. So I've got a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old now. And if I shared with them this story, they'd be like, "No way. There's no way." So you're an
Thank
inspiration.
you.
I'm going to need you to talk to them because we need to speed this
Yes.
process up.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
And it's good for our viewers to know that, like, you didn't graduate with, a very easy degree per se. I mean, chemistry is pretty tough. So what was that like for you? I mean, there's always, I think there's this misinformation about how long it actually takes to learn, right? Can you talk to us about what your learning experience was like and how you were able to kind of fast track your education?
Absolutely, yeah. So I started off my major in chemistry because, like I said, I wanted to be a doctor like my mom, and medical school requires a lot of science courses. So that was the ideology behind that. And I mean, I really my entire experience at college and universities really was a traditional experience. I didn't go to parties or live on the dorm, but minus those kinds of like maybe social bits. But I did have my own socialization track. I was treated as a normal student. If people even knew or found out about my age, it was a conversation we had because they were surprised. And then we moved on to the project or the assignment or the paper that we were working on. So, and that was really refreshing to be treated just as a straight up normal student. When I was in my homeschool program, I was not entirely homeschooled. I went to a college style school, which is where you go to a building with teachers and friends and the whole traditional schooling, but 2 days a week, and the rest of the time you are at home. So that allowed for the customization, but also provided some structure, some social teachers and guidance, things like that. And I was always like very clearly younger than all the people in my class, and that was a very like common discussion point, which I didn't mind at all. It was never bad conversations, but going to college, something about it, I guess you just wouldn't think, or maybe they, didn't care per se, but yeah, they didn't particularly notice or comment on the fact that I looked young or that I was young. So being a major in chemistry, it takes a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of labs, a lot of things like that, and I was able to completely lean into that. And then when I switched my major to education, you have to do a lot of practicums and go and do practice teaching in classrooms. And even then, I was able to completely lean into that as well. So I think part of it's the college I chose. I went to Texas Women's University, like I said, and that is a very safe space for women and non traditional students. But additionally, I also was accustomed to being a non traditional student myself as well. So I think those two things went hand in hand and made the experience a very positive experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. And let me ask you, because you transferred out of the traditional school in fifth grade, which is kind of
Yes.
a pretty pivotal year. What was going on at that time that made you decide, you and your parents?
Yeah, yeah. So I was in elementary school, at least the way my local school's system had structured it, it was first through fourth grade was elementary school. So when I started fifth grade, I had just started intermediate school. And starting intermediate school, my parents immediately noticed a shift in my passion and excitement for learning. My grades, they went from straight A's to A's and B's, which is not bad by any means, but it's something that my parents noticed. And they noticed, like I said, my interest in the content was dissolving. So with that being said, they asked me, hey, just checking in, what's going on? You're not doing bad. We just want to know how we can support you or, talk to your teachers, whatever you may need, trying to stay in the loop. And I told them, well, I don't have to study. I don't have to work at all to get a B, which is a perfectly good grade. Why would I spend time working, studying, etc., to get an A when I'm satisfied with a B? And of course, a B is a good grade if that's something that you worked for, you learned for, you invested in. But if you're not trying at all, that's obviously not the point of the curriculum or school. So my parents requested I be tested for the gifted and talented program. That way I can maybe get some more challenging content, something that's stimulating me and engaging me. And they told my parents, no, you can only take that test to qualify in kindergarten. I was born in California and we didn't move to Texas until I was in second grade, about 8 years old. So they were basically saying gifted and talented programs would never be an option for me. But there were students who were not of color who were taking that gifted and talented test. So I had already faced a lot of micro and macro aggressions from my peers and teachers, which I'm sure we can get into, but I had already faced a lot of sexism and racism in this specific school. The elementary school was great, but moving to this intermediate school, it was really not a conducive space for me as a student, me as my demographics, me as a learner overall. So my parents decided, there has to be something better for our girl and pulled me up.
No, that's awesome. And interesting enough, ironically, I moved my kids from California to Texas, and my children were one of my daughters was in gifted and talented, and the other one was as well. However, Texas had this rule that if they weren't in gifted and talented here, they couldn't get in, and I had to fervently push for them to test her. I mean, it was a lot of. I was like, no, she was already in it. I had to have the district from the other school contact her. So I get what you're saying
Yeah.
about just how
Yes.
those microaggressions happen, and
Exactly.
they filter through, and
Yeah.
coincidentally, sometimes that filtering looks very racist, quite
Right.
frankly.
True. That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
right. So this experience resonates with me, and probably will
Hmm.
resonate a lot with our listeners and our viewers. Okay, so let's jump forward. Fifth grade, then you graduated from high school. So fifth grade, you're what, like what, 10,
Yeah, 10,
11?
11. Yeah, around there.
You had 2 more years of K-12 education, and then you
Yes.
graduate, and then you go off to community college, which is amazing. So, and then you're also the pioneer because you were the first in your family. One of the things that we talked about, pray bless your heart too for that, because I'm the baby, but I know the first one kind of sets the pace for the other one.
Yes,
And if you're
exactly.
anything like my older siblings, they're always like, look at me like, oh, you got it so easy, you know? Trying to do all the hard work.
Yes, that's sibling dynamic.
But I have one of the things that we mentioned when we were talking to your mom is that people will look at your story and say, "Oh, well, she's the exception to the rule because obviously she's gifted and talented," and not to take anything away from your intelligence because clearly you are tremendously intelligent. However, there is a catch here because your brother and sister were also able to do this, right? And
Mhm.
again, the whole family is completely talented. But one of the things that I noticed that your mother mentioned is that, it was intellect too, but it was also just a process of like just looking at a mindset shift differently.
Right.
Can you talk to us about that and maybe
Yeah.
share your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. There's one thing as you were talking that really was coming to mind because I do think it's easy for a lot of people to dissociate from our story because, oh, GT or just, that like just intellectual that they think is so like different. But really, we were more normal than I think a lot of people realize, like just looking from the outside in. When I started homeschooling, again, I was around like 11 or 12. I had, 10 or 11, but this happened around that time. I had a planner and that had all of my tasks in it. And being in public school, something that I say often is I feel it doesn't teach time management as well as being homeschooled. And partially because when you're homeschooled, it is all on you. So that's hard to compete with. But additionally, I do think public schools can do a better job encouraging that skill to be developed. But in any event, I had not had that skill developed. So I had a planner with all of my tasks. And when I didn't want to do a task or thought it was good enough, I would check it off whether it was complete or not. And things like that are really just those kinds of like those mindset shifts, those developmental, like it's, you can look in and be like, oh, she was always ahead or she was always like, just old soul, like different from other 11-year-olds. But truly, like you kind of see like just with that little snippet of the story, how there was a learning curve. There was a learn yourself as a student, how you study best, how you manage time best, how you hold yourself accountable. And those things were really sharpened in homeschooling that I don't think I could have gotten that same degree in public school. And those are the kinds of mindset shifts that you have when you start homeschooling. You really go from a structured environment where if you have an exam at the end of the week, the professor's reminding you, you have your, parents or peers that are on you, to a homeschool setting where you have to take responsibility and take the driver's seat for your own education. Because at the end of the day, when you're homeschooled or you're doing a college style school like I did, I may see a professor once a week. And so I just need to remember that next week is the exam. I need to remember next week the homework is due. Homework can be due online in between classes. It's really something you need to develop a system for. And that in our book, The Homeschool Alternative, is what we discuss in relation to the homeschooling mindset. That's kind of the key theme throughout the book because homeschooling is not always an option, whether you work several jobs or, your child may really blossom in public school in the sense of socialization or other elements that are really helpful to them as a learner in person. But you can still apply homeschool mindsets and practices to any type of school, private, charter, public. I've had experiences in all. You can bring that homeschool mindset to each space. And what that means is really taking every opportunity as a learning opportunity. The opportunity to hold yourself accountable in time management, like I was referring to. Really take that as an opportunity to take that, tackle it head on, learn yourself. And that way, when you go to college, that transition from a senior in high school where you're, checked in on every single day of the week to a freshman in college where you can set your own schedule and potentially have all online classes. You never know. That transition's hard for a lot of students. But if you can take this, even if the public school doesn't teach it, supplement your education with this practice of, for my example, holding yourself accountable in time management, that is a homeschool mindset. That's going to the store and seeing which pack of pens is better and asking your child. That's the homeschool mindset. Going to the park and teaching them about the water cycle. That's the homeschool mindset. It doesn't even have to be extra homework or packets. It doesn't have to be, like you get home from a long day of work and it's you have to like tutor your student. It could be, but it also could just appear when you're at the store. And that's what we talk about in the book.
No, that's great. What I'm hearing you say is that, the homeschool mindset is always learning, right? It doesn't cut off at a certain time of day. It's like
Exactly.
always finding
Exactly.
opportunities to
Hmm.
incorporate learning, which makes a lot of sense because when we look at the structure of education as it is now, you have a certain amount of hours that you're supposed to complete. But then if you fast forward that to 24 hours in a day, and as a homeschooler, you're constantly building those hours into what you're doing every day. So that is a connective point that I think a lot of us who don't know about homeschooling can associate with.
Right.
So you mentioned socialization, and I would assume that you're a young girl still, young woman, not girl, you're a young lady still, and you obviously, like you said, you didn't have the traditional college experience, which I didn't either, and sometimes I feel like that's overrated. But I do have to ask you, what did you do to implement other like socialization into your life? Because that's also very important. And I'm sure there's listeners that are like, well, yeah, but I want my kids to be able to have friends and go out and do things,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And that's something that my mom was very concerned about when she pulled us out and decided to homeschool us is, okay, I still want them to be functioning, humans in society, because it's one thing to be book smart, but being able to be street smart, having a community, those things are important. So what she decided to do, and this is an element of homeschooling that you need to be mindful of if you're a parent or, just a guardian, whatever, homeschooling a student, you need to be mindful that socialization is a lot more intentional than it is at public school, but because of that, it is a lot higher of a quality. At public school, it's whoever happens to live nearby. You can move and never see this human being again. These people may be not good influences on you, not good, like for the type of person that your child is or that you are. And additionally, it may not be a real friendship in the sense of, like I said, they move and they completely disappear from your life. So it really was never built on necessarily anything substantive, and it could become that, but any friendship could become that. But in homeschooling, it's an intentional effort to plug into the school. As a taxpayer, you can utilize what the public schools have as resources, band, basketball, so forth and so on. So if you do still want to plug into that, if your child or student does still have friends in the school that they want to interact with, those kids don't turn off or disappear at the end of the school day. They have lives outside of the 8 hours that they're at school. But for me, in my experience, my mother was very intentional about plugging me into community organizations as well. So I did basketball, and basketball is something that is broken up by age, at least when you're that young. So I did like the girls 12Y basketball. So I was on a team with 10 other girls, 12 other girls, and we were all the same age, and we would travel to different games. You really still get that exact socialization. And because I was homeschooled or partially, hybrid homeschool, I had a lot more time to invest into these socializations. So I did fencing, piano, harp, you name it, I probably did it. But I say that because I was able to. And obviously, some of that's finances, some of that is the, parents' means to be around versus working two or jobs or whatever else. But those things set aside, my parents were also able to manage my schedule in a way where I could attend all of these extracurriculars. And I think that experience was healthier for me, not only because it was intentional, like I was saying earlier, it wasn't we just live nearby. These are families who sought out this exact program. And now you already have that shared interest. But on top of that, we also had several different socialization groups. So if something went wrong in a socialization group, say at basketball, I fell, whatever, and everyone is talking about it, the rest of my groups have no idea this basketball team even exists. But at public school, if something happens, it can sometimes feel like the end of the world because that's everyone that you see all day, every day. And lastly, I think my socialization was a higher quality because I was able to socialize with people regardless of age. And that's how it is in the real world. You're not even necessarily going to know someone's age when you're a coworker, when you are out at a community event. You're not even necessarily going to know how old they are. And if you do, you're going to have to be comfortable with your supervisor being younger than you, managing people who are older than you. That is something, it's not always going to be the 12th graders or the seniors, the 18-year-olds or the seniors. It's not always going to be that way. And so I was able to get exposed, and my siblings were able to get exposed to that early. Our socialization was, therefore, when we transferred into like the real world and we had to navigate socialization as an adult, we were able to do that completely seamlessly because that's something we've been doing, navigating with adults, since we were kids. And my mom always says, if you're trying to like raise a puppy. She compared, the analogy, raise a puppy to be good, like social with humans, like not, I don't know, crazy or bouncing off the walls. You would socialize them with humans, not other puppies. So if you want your child to be able to grow up and be functioning around adults, know how to talk to adults, navigate the adult world, socializing them with other children is not going to be what achieves that. Not that that doesn't have value, but there was a lot of value in being socialized with the full age spectrum.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so let's talk about where you are now, because you are now you graduated from college, went off to law school, earned your law degree, and now you are a city attorney, which
Yes.
is amazing. I have two questions for you. The first is you mentioned that you switched your major to education. Why
Yes.
education?
So I, like I said, was a very non-traditional student, and when I transferred to Texas Women's University, that is the time to look into what classes have you taken, how can they transfer and plug into the requirements that TWU has. When you're a transfer student, you have to look at what you're bringing. That way, you're not starting over when you go to the new school, and so that time is a time of reflection inherently. And I realized how fortunate I was to have realized. Further, how fortunate I was to have parents who not only had the means to homeschool me and the opportunity to homeschool me. But on top of that, even knew that was an option, knew that, had the confidence to take advantage of it, had the resources and community to lean into. Like, truly, it was a stars aligned moment for me. And how many students are we overlooking? Because if I stayed in the public school system, and I was a public school teacher, so I know this to be true in retrospect, but even before I was teaching, I knew this to be true. If I had stayed in the public school system, I never would have had even a remotely similar route that I do now. And not to say that I wouldn't have been successful or, just had, been very, very like prosperous, but it would have been so different. And this opportunity that I had never would have been presented to me because I couldn't even get into gifted and talented, much less skip 5 grades. So how many students are we missing? How many students are we missing? And they're losing connection and interest in education because, when am I going to use this in the real world? Why would I care about something like this? And those are potentially students that you've lost, students that maybe otherwise would have been leaning fully into chemistry or geometry, things that you may not use when grocery shopping, but can shape the next doctors, the next engineers. But they lose their passion, at least for a period in their life, and that is very unfortunate. So I switched my major to education because I knew I wanted to actually do education policy, hence law school. Really change the nuts and bolts of our K through 12 system. It hasn't been updated since it was created, and America is much more diverse and looks incredibly different than when it was created and the intent it was created with. So now it needs to serve Black and Brown students. Now it needs to serve LGBTQ students. Now it needs to serve, different learners. It really needs an update. So I want to go into education policy and really make sure that we're serving the students that you should be able to use our public school system and get the best education for you. I should be able to be able to stay in the public school system and be sitting right in front of you right now having this conversation because that's what school is meant to be, really to serve the learner. I always use the analogy like it's like trying to use a cookie cutter system, but you have like a bowl of fruit. All these students are so different. Not only are they not even cookie dough, they're not going to fit in this system that you have. So you squeeze them in and they make it through. Most people do. And, maybe most people turn out fine, but fine shouldn't be the goal of our of our education system. So with that being said, that's why I transferred my major from chemistry to education when I moved to TWU.
No, that's awesome, and I really believe I'm super excited to see where you go next with that because you right on the mark with education policy specifically and the need to look at it differently. You mentioned like our system has not changed since the inception of education, especially
Right,
from a traditional school environment.
right,
So you're right. There are a lot of kids that are thriving in traditional schools.
right,
However, there are a ton of other options out there,
right,
and we
exactly.
need people like you
Yeah,
who have seen the whole spectrum, who come back and invest in school because a lot of people, will get in the teaching profession, they'll do it for a little bit, they'll
yep,
get totally disillusioned by it, and then they'll go and do something totally different
that's
and not
exactly
even
right.
return back to it. And we are finding that to be a huge issue for Black teachers, right? And keep finding ways to keep teachers of color in the classroom
Exactly.
despite all of the
Right, right,
disadvantages that we
right,
see.
right,
Yeah.
right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of time left. I would love to just continue to talk to you because there's
Yeah,
so many layers to your story, but I do appreciate all that you've shared.
yeah.
Because you have still so much more growth and legacy to leave on this earth, I'm curious to know what's next for Haley. Like, what do you think the next big step will be for you?
No, like I said, I was a public school teacher, and my long term goal is to be in education policy, kind of combining my legal experience and my education experience, both in school but out of school when I was teaching and now practicing. But I also, being a citizen of America and the world, of course, have many other passions, social justice, gender rights, so forth and so on. So, right now, I'm a city attorney, and I have been put in a very fortunate position where I can be directly involved in everything that's happening in Minneapolis and everything that's happening statewide in Minnesota specifically that we've seen in the news. And so that is definitely filling my cup in a way that I can invest in some passions that I have relating to social justice, relating to modern laws it develops. But additionally, long term, on top of being involved in education policy and some of those other passions that I have in policy relating to that, I'm also really interested in continuing doing public speaking and my writing. I do a lot of writing for the Star Tribune, for Insight News, and I want to continue that as well because I do think that there's a lot of power in the written word, and these kinds of engagements, these kinds of journalism platforms, just like Choice Words, allow people who maybe never would have came across certain stories, certain ideas, certain opportunities to get it in front of them. And so I really want to stay engaged with that long term as well, because not just my story, but also more so what people can take away from that. Because I always say, like, such a quote of mine that you don't find your path, you make it. And I think that's something that a lot of people like, duh. But when you really break it down, like, I think that a lot of people realize just how much of a passenger they've been, just how much they've left up to others or up to systems or up to chance, thinking that they'll, find themselves rather than building like brick by brick. And obviously resources vary amongst groups. Again, that's where some of my passions lie. But being able to take that initiative and feel that empowerment is one of the first steps in changing lives. So that's something that I'm also very interested in, continuing these engagements, continuing writing. That's what I see in my future, like to just kind of drop hints.
That is great, and I'm super excited to bear witness to what that future will look like for you, Miss Haley. This
Thank
has
you.
been a great conversation, and I am just so encouraged and just so inspired by your story, and just believe that you and your family are just amazing. And we in this world need to hear more from people like you across the board. One of the things that we try to do in every episode of our show is leave our viewers, our listeners, with a few choice words, both choice words being in the sense of the choices we have to choose options in schooling, but also just the choice words that, invite you to just be you and dive into your whole identity. You just shared something, you shared a lot that was very profound. It was kind of a good segue into choice words. That you don't, what did you say? You don't walk your path, you build it or something,
Yeah, you
whatever.
don't find your path. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But if you wanted to leave with some choice words for our guests, what would you want them to know?
To be more proactive, if you're not already, in not just your education but your life as a whole. That's kind of a long-winded way of saying the quote that I said earlier, but again, that's what I hope my story inspires in others. It's really, really easy to fall into, well, this is what we do, this is what the country does, but to feel empowered in taking advantage of other opportunities that are at your disposal, doing research, seeing how you can supplement your situation or change your situation if it's not serving you. So that's what I hope people take away from my story, is not to copy me, is not to, this was never the plan. We didn't homeschool trying to graduate early or, get some title, but that was the result because I was a proactive learner and a proactive leader in my own life, and same with my parents. So lean on your great trees in your life too.
That's awesome. Well, Ms. Haley, thank you so much for sharing that. This has been a wonderful episode, and we will make sure that our listeners learn about Homeschool Alternative. And also, please stay in touch so that we can continue
Yes,
to embrace and amplify all the things you do. And also, if there's any publishings coming your way, we would love to hear about that. I'm also
absolutely.
giving great blessings to you and prayer to you for Minnesota, because there is a lot happening there from a
There is a
social
lot.
justice perspective.
Yeah.
And being a city attorney, I can only imagine you are literally in the trenches. So my prayers go out to you and your
Thank you.
family. And again,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for this amazing opportunity to meet with you.
Oh no, thank you for the opportunity. I've loved our discussion and I'm really excited to stay in touch. And yeah, the book's The Homeschool Alternative. So if anyone wants to find it, it's on Amazon.
Okay. Thanks again. All right. And that will conclude this episode of Choice Words. Please follow us for more information. You can go to chooseschools.org. I am Jay Artis-Wright, your host. Thank you again, Miss Haley, and we'll see y'all next time.
Thank you for tuning in to Choice Words by Freedom to Choose Schools. If you want to help spread the word about the amazing schools and leaders you hear from on this podcast, we invite you to vote for your favorite school in our I Choose video challenge. Just visit our Instagram page and like, share, or comment on your favorite school videos. The winning school gets national recognition and a cash prize. So go and vote today.